we wrapped up the 7 parables of Matthew 13. And if you can put up my title slide, the first slide, I can control it. I control the rest. The title for the sermon, they got it. And then we're going to go, oh, no, they didn't. But we wrapped up the 7 parables of Matthew 13. And in the parables, we found that the surface of the parables sounds like an us versus them dynamic. But when I dig deeper, they're really all about me. They're about the good and bad that is within me. I'm introduced in the second parable, though, about a time that I can look forward to, that I anticipate, where the weeds that grow within me will be cleaned out. And like precious metal that goes through purifying heat, I will come out shining. And this idea is also seen in the 7th parable as well. We saw that last week. That if there is sorting to be done between the good and the bad, it isn't my job. I don't need to worry about that. My job is to simply be the good fish. Or, we didn't have time to get to this last week, perhaps the good and the bad fish are both swimming within the ocean in me, like the wheat and the weeds. And the net of the kingdom is collecting everything within me. And then the bad will be sorted out of me. Either way, I anticipate when I'll be taken to the kingdom of heaven and I'll be processed and cleaned up for the final time and set free. The furnace of fire in the parables here is not hell. It is the idea of a smelter that is purifying what is precious in me until it shines. It can be painful at times, but it is the path to my freedom from all the junk that's in me. And the metaphor of the smelter in the 2nd and 7th parable, it's that the process, it's the metaphor of the process by which I am freed from my own pollutants. And it calls us back to what Joseph was told all the way back in Matthew chapter 1. Jesus is not coming to save people against people. Jesus is coming to save people from themselves. He's coming to save me from me. Matthew has taken chapters upon chapters to show how this is happening. In chapter 13, the parables, they save me from me by teaching me to let go of answers and rest in the mystery, in the mystical, and embrace trust of Jesus. The parables free me from depending upon my own mastery. And when I will endure the parables and let them shape me, when I will embrace them, even the parables become the flames of the smelter by which impurities come out of me. As we wrap up Matthew 13, Jesus asks in Matthew 13:51, there we go. Have you understood this? He asks his disciples, have you understood this? I've given you 7 amazing parables. And they go, yes, of course we have. But we know because we know what is following. No, they have not. We know that they still don't get what they think they're getting. But Jesus leaves it alone at this point. The seed of the parables has been planted. Jesus will just have to be patient to let it grow. I wonder if Matthew, as he was writing his gospel, shook his head and chuckled, remembering when they told Jesus, of course we get this. And they really didn't. I wonder if Matthew just shook his head and had a little chuckle. They had such confidence that they were getting it. The section of the parables ends with this comment from Jesus. And Jesus said to them, therefore every scribe who has become a disciple in the kingdom of heaven is like the master of a household who brings out of his treasure what is new and what is old. Scribes, they were the Bible experts of their day. They were the professors in Bible college. And a better way to read this for our modern minds can be this way. Every master of the old way of reading Scripture and the old way of understanding God, when they choose to become a student again by the undoing of knowledge that the parables bring, and they become a student of the kingdom of heaven, They will be like a master of a household who brings out of his treasure stores what is old and then also what is new. This is what the parables do. They bring you into study at the University of the Kingdom of Heaven, UKH. The scribes are the ones who were the experts in all the answers. They were the experts in the kingdom of heaven, or so they thought. They placed themselves as the experts over all things related to the kingdom of heaven. But Jesus says that if the professors will allow the parables to turn them back into freshmen, Jesus says that they will then discover treasure they never realized in the old things, the scriptures that they possessed. And they will discover even more treasure in all the new things that they'll learn. This is in the same vein as what we already read way back about how the new cannot occupy the same space as the old. We cannot have old wine containers mixing with the new. We can't combine the old clothes with just some new patches from the new stuff. And if you even dare to combine the old and the new will destroy the old. A scribe who is a master of the old must make the tough decision to become a student of the new. They must relearn things, starting with the unlearning, even the deprogramming that the parables bring. With that call for the masters to become students once more, Jesus heads out and goes back to his hometown. He goes to the synagogue and starts teaching, and the people are amazed at his teaching. He goes back to his hometown, and the people are amazed at his teaching, but they get offended. They don't argue with what Jesus is doing and saying. That stuff blows their mind. They get upset at who dares to teach them. Who dares to think he is better than us? They say, "This is Jesus. We knew him when he ran around with boogers hanging out of his nose as a kid. We knew him when he cried after skinning his knee while he was playing with the other kids. We knew him when he was potty training and he peed his pants. Why does Jesus come to speak to us like he is above us now?" They loved what Jesus was saying, but they couldn't get over who was saying it. So we're told in Matthew 13:58, and he did not do many deeds of power there because of their unbelief. Often we can think that it was the unbelief of the people that inhibits Jesus from doing miracles. But as we have gone through Matthew up to this point, we see that big faith people, little faith people, and no faith people, they all receive miracles. What we read here is actually that the people didn't believe because they were offended. And we've considered time and again, connecting it all the way back with Jacob wrestling with God, that God doesn't force things. God doesn't break arms. And so Jesus backs off and does not press into offense here. He's still causing a stir among the people, though. And Matthew 14 is going to open with Herod thinking that Jesus is a resurrected John the Baptist. This is how we learn in Matthew's gospel that John is dead. Herod had John killed a while back. And a while back, Jesus said that John the Baptist was the embodiment of all the old that was to die off. It's the old things in which the scribes were the experts. Jesus says that the law and the prophets prophesied or spoke until John the Baptist. With John, with his death, the independent voice of the First Testament comes to an end. And Jesus' revelation now speaks for it all. As Jesus is ramping up his words and his ministry, Matthew lets us know that John and the old has made their final exit. John's been killed. I love to keep looking at the skilled manner with which Matthew has organized his material. We have this entire section of the old. We have the crowds who are looking for the old type of Messiah. We have the disciples themselves who are stuck in old understandings. We have the scribes mentioned who are the experts of the old. We have Jesus' hometown stuck in the old Jesus, the snotty-nosed Jesus, who they can't stand to have teach them. And we have Herod prophetically embodying all of this being captured in the old as he mistakes Jesus for a resurrection of the old that has died off. Matthew 14, 1-2 says that at that time, Herod, the ruler, heard reports about Jesus, and he said to his servants, "This is John the Baptist. He's been raised from the dead." Everybody keeps putting Jesus, trying to cram him into the boxes of the old. Jesus can't catch a break from people who are caught in the past. Matthew wants the reader to get what everybody else back at that time was struggling to get, what they didn't understand way back then. The old is dead. Jesus is the new. Stop mixing the two. Jesus is not the resurrection of the old. Jesus is the new that was to come. And we're going to come now to the feeding of the 5,000 to see the new revelation of God that destroys the old. At this point, Jesus has popped up on the radar of Herod. So like he always does when he pops up on the radar of the world's powers before it's his time for the final showdown, Jesus heads out and he plans to lay low for a while. It says that now when Jesus heard this, when he heard that Herod thought that he was the new John the Baptist, Jesus withdrew from there in a boat to a deserted place by himself. But when the crowds heard it, they followed him on foot from the towns. The word here for deserted place is actually wilderness. This is the same word that's used for the wilderness that Israel entered into out of Egypt so long ago. As Matthew's entire gospel is rewriting our First Testament with Jesus as the focus, we are meant to see the books of Exodus and Numbers in these places. Jesus, as a child, first went into and out of Egypt, like the people of God did in the Exodus. Now, Jesus is God in the Exodus journey, who has done miracles and now is leading the way into the wilderness as the masses are following him. Jesus is trying to lay low and avoid the headlines for a while, but we read, when he went ashore, he saw a great crowd, and he had compassion for them, and he cured their sick. Remember what we read from the early church creed in 2 Timothy 2:13. If we are faithless, he remains faithful. I don't know if I can go to the next slide. I'll have Liz go to the next slide, I think. He cannot deny himself. Jesus has come to earth, and he says that in all he does, he reveals the Father. He is revealing a Father who cannot ignore need, even for the faithless. Because Jesus isn't stupid here. He knows the people following him are faithless. He is meeting the needs of people who have no faith in him. Because the people who are with him in the wilderness, they're taking advantage of God's charity. They are infatuated with him. They're happy to take what he will give them at the time, but they don't have a faith that sticks them to Jesus. These people saw some miracles, so now they're out in the wilderness following God, just like long ago. But Jesus knows that when they get hungry, When things get hard, they'll forget the miracles and they'll grumble, just like the people did long ago. We read in Exodus, the whole congregation of the Israelites complained against Moses and Aaron in the wilderness. The Israelites said to them, if only we had died by the hand of the Lord in the land of Egypt, when we sat by pots of meat and ate our fill of bread. For you have brought us out into this wilderness to kill the whole assembly with hunger. As Jesus is now God from the Exodus, the disciples become like Moses and Aaron, who acted as go-betweens between the people and God to the people. The disciples come to Jesus in the wilderness, and they say, in the evening, the disciples come and they say, this is a deserted place. This is a wilderness, and the hour is now late. Hint, hint, the people are growing hungry. We're walking through them, and now they're beginning to grumble. The people don't have anything to eat. So send the crowds away so that they may go into the villages and buy food for themselves. This is a repeat of the wilderness experience so long ago. As the disciples are saying, Jesus, you have drawn the people into the wilderness where there is no food to eat. And now they're hungry. Matthew wants us to see Psalm 78 at play here. Psalm 78 says, yet they sinned more against him, rebelling against the Most High in the desert. They tested God in their heart by demanding the food they craved. They spoke against God, saying, can God spread a table in the wilderness? Well, now they're with Emmanuel, God with us, in the wilderness. And the disciples have decided he can't spread a table here. Send the people back to the town so they can go eat. So they're speaking against God, saying, can God spread a table in the wilderness? Even though he struck the rock so that water gushed out and torrents overflowed, can he also give bread or provide meat for his people? Verse 20 is saying, you have seen miracles, but you're still asking if your powerful God will watch you follow him into the deserts of life without giving you what you need for sustenance. You are questioning if God will give you the bread and the meat that you need. So the claim is made. The claim is made to Jesus as it was to God so long ago. You have led us out here to go hungry. The disciples claim to have understood the parables, and yet they prove that they have not. The parables refuse a sure answer, and they invite you to trust into the one that you are following, Jesus, even when there is no answer readily available. Yet, here the disciples are, seeing a problem with no ready answer. And they don't trust Jesus to take care of them and the others. The disciples still have much to learn. So Jesus continues their education. Jesus tells the disciples, you go feed the people. If this is a problem, go solve it. If you don't trust me, if you don't want to just walk along and think that I will provide for what they need, and you want to bring this issue to me, go figure out the answer. Jesus said to them, they don't need to go away. You give them something to eat. The disciples admit that they're not equipped to answer what they're facing. They replied, we have nothing here but 5 loaves and 2 fish. They said, what we have in our lives isn't enough to have an answer in the wilderness. They have finally come to the place the parables were meant to lead them to all along. They confess, as the parables call us to confess. We're not equipped to solve what is before us, so we must learn to trust. And now Jesus says, upon their confession of their inability to understand how to solve this, Jesus says, congratulations! Now you have come to the first step of the parables, to let go of depending upon your own mastery. Now the second step, depend upon your master. Bring me what little you have, if anything, and trust me to use it. Trust me to see everyone through situations for which you can see no answer. So they bring Jesus the little bit of food that they were able to secure. 5 loaves of bread and 2 fishes, the bread and meat of Psalm 78. And we know the story. Jesus multiplies the food and he feeds the masses who are actually there taking advantage of his charity. And he even ensures that there is enough for the men and women of his disciples who echoed the charge of their ancestors. You've allowed us to go into the wilderness, and you've left us hungry. We know that story of the feeding of the 5,000 as we take it out of Matthew's direct context. But do we see the story as Matthew has contextualized it? Do we see how the new revelation is destroying the old perception to the point that masters of the old must become students of the new and relearn things in the light of Jesus? Here's the revelation of Jesus' reenactment of the Exodus. Jesus is God with us, of whom even his disciples did not think, like Psalm 78 said, that he would provide in the wilderness. But here's what Jesus says. Here's where Jesus says that the scribes and everybody else has to let go of their expertise in the old and become students of the new. In Psalm 78, it goes on to say, they spoke against Jesus, saying, can God spread a table in the wilderness? Even though Jesus had done so many miracles, they said, can he give bread and meat to his people? Therefore, in the first Exodus, when the Lord heard their doubt, he was full of rage. Their questioning kindled a fire against Jacob. His anger mounted against Israel because they had no faith in God and did not trust his saving power. Yet, he commanded, even though he was angry, he was murderously angry, he commanded the skies above to open the doors of heaven. He rained down on them manna to eat and gave them the grain of heaven. Mortals ate the bread of angels. He sent them food in abundance. Look at his mercy, even though he's so angry. He caused the east wind to blow in the heavens, and by his power he let out the south wind. He rained upon them like dust, winged birds like the sand of the sea. He let these birds fall within their camp. He's so merciful. They didn't even have to work for the food. The birds dropped right in front of their feet. And he let these birds fall all around their dwellings. And they ate, and they were well filled, for he gave them what they craved. But before they had satisfied their craving, while the food was still in their mouths, the anger of God could be held back no longer. It rose against them. And while they were still eating, he killed the strongest of them and laid low the flower of Israel. The old clothing by which the people had dressed God was as someone with limited patience for faithless people. He's an angry God who will simultaneously feed you with one hand and kill you with the other while you were still eating. But Jesus has come to the point of his own death to show us God as he really is. As Jesus has said, to see me is to see the Father. And we, me and the Father, we are faithful to the faithless. Back in 2 Timothy. We are patient with the slow disciples. We even forgive those who would crucify us. Whether it's crucifying our character during the Exodus, crucifying our character again in Psalm 78, crucifying our character again at the hands of my own disciples who don't see in me someone who would feed you in the desert, or crucifying me finally as an actual person, as God, Emmanuel, really and truly is with us. The events of the feeding of the 5,000, Matthew records them as a reenactment of the Exodus. It is Psalm 78 put before our eyes. But this time, God is also put before our eyes in the flesh of Jesus. And just in case we think that Jesus is the nice one who feeds the faithless, while the Father is the God who kills the faithless while they eat, Jesus makes sure to look up to heaven as he blesses what little food he has. He looks up to heaven, the place where he perceived the Father, to demonstrate that this miracle flows equally from the Father as it does from the Son. The Psalms often reveal God as he was perceived and even experienced to be. But Jesus has come to reveal God as he truly is. He feeds the faithless masses who would take advantage of his charity one day, and they will call for his crucifixion the next day. He feeds even the men and women of his inner circle who should know better, but they question him anyway. He feeds them all, and nothing. He doesn't kill them. He kills none of them. This is the revelation of God that Jesus says, try to contain this revelation within the wineskins of perception that held the old view of God. And this revelation is just going to blow up the old wineskin. This is the revelation of God that Jesus says, just try to patch this revelation onto the old duplicitous clothing of Psalm 78 that dresses God up as one who mercifully feeds you while killing you with food in your mouth. And this new revelation will destroy the old clothes. We're going to come to communion, and in communion we're carried 2,000 years back to the foot of the cross to see God exposed, fully naked, completely revealed to the world. God's hands, the Father's hands, are fully revealed as Jesus' hands are stretched out and nailed in place. Jesus is doing what he always does. He is revealing the Father. He is revealing God, and he reveals to us hands that are weaponless. If we wonder what Jesus fights with, it is the sword of his mouth. The mouth through which he declares mercy of forgiveness to even those who will kill him. And he fights with the fire of unconditional love that burns in his heart. And it pours out, his heart pours out refreshing water and life into our world as we pierce it. We get carried by our communion today back to the foot of the cross to receive the Father's reverse economy. So we come to the bread first. In this bread is the body of God's perfect revelation, that as we break his body, he heals our world. Let's take the bread. Here in the cup is the life of God's perfect revelation, that as we end his life, he pours life into our world. Let's take the cup.